Welcome back to the Saints and Alumni Show right here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint. I'm your host this week, Brandon Murphy, class of 2017 from the Office of Alumni Engagement. And this week I'm joined by Don Levy, Director of the Siena College Research Institute. A reminder to everybody listening to the podcast that there are a few ways to listen to the bi-weekly show that airs on WVCR 88.3 The Saint, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, and you can subscribe to the Siena College Alumni YouTube channel to check out the complete selection of shows. Don, we know it's an incredibly busy time of the year, couple weeks left until the election, but we appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today, in the studio with us. I know that you've had your own podcast through the years. You've been on the Alumni Connection in the past, but we appreciate you being here. How's it being in the studio today, Don?
Fantastic. Great to be here. Great to be with you guys. And remember very fondly the days of coming over here. We had a show we did every week. We called it Behind the Numbers. We did that for probably about 5 or 6 years. So stood behind your mic once in a while.
And today I have the opportunity to have our listeners get to know you a little bit, get to know the Institute a little bit, and some of those behind the numbers again with the upcoming election. But for the regular listeners of the show, that they know that we typically talk about how somebody ended up at Siena, and 99% of the time it's students and alumni that we have on the show, and every so often we get a chance to have a different perspective. And I want to take the clocks back a little bit and give our listeners an opportunity to understand a little bit about your background, Don, and how you ended up here at Siena College.
Sure. In 2007, I was on the faculty of West Virginia Wesleyan College, teaching sociology and running a project called the Institute for Social and Community Research. So we did public opinion research on a regional basis there in West Virginia. I'd been there for a couple of years after being at the University of Connecticut for about 6 or 7 years. At UConn, I was one of the principal investigators at the Center for Population Research, where we did a variety of different both public opinion research as well as we used to do a mirror census at UConn. The other great thing about my time at the University of Connecticut is at that point in time, the Roper Center was located there, and that's where all old public opinion survey data goes to be archived. So I had a tremendous amount of training in the analysis of public opinion data going all the way back to the early days of George Gallup. So in fast forward to 2007, Siena College engaged in a national search looking for someone to come in and take over the Research Institute. And I said, that sounds like me. So I sent them off a letter and my vita. They were kind enough to bring me in for an interview. And I met with then President, Father Kevin Mullen. Remember it quite well. At that point in time, he looked at me and he said, what we're looking for is for someone to take the Research Institute to the next level. And what he meant by that was we'd like to have a national footprint for Siena. And I have kept those words with me for the past 17 years, and I think we've been pretty successful in doing that.
I'm really excited to highlight that national footprint in the second segment of today's show. And you talked about getting here in 2007 and building that national footprint. But I want to give our listeners a little bit of a background about the Siena College Research Institute. It had been around much longer than prior to 2007. For those that may not be aware, can you just give us a little bit of history on the Institute and some of the ways that you've advanced it forward since 2007?
Sure. The Institute was founded by two members, longtime members of the faculty, Doug Lonstrom and Tom Kelly. And the story that they like to tell is that, as members of the faculty often do, sometimes they would get into these arguments. You know, they would try to prove each other right or wrong about whether it be aspects of public opinion, or they were especially interested in the opinions of various experts. So they decided to do some research in order to solve some of these pressing questions that they would debate with one another. For example, they were acutely interested in a ranking of the American presidents, and that's one of the projects that they started, that the Institute was born working on, and really continues to this day. We continue to do that study each and every time a new president is elected, and we're Siena College Research Institute is one of the few ongoing rankings of American presidents, and that dates all the way back to 1980 when Doug and Tom would have those arguments over who was right. The next big step really was towards the end of the 90s, 1999, when Doug Lundstrom decided that we've got to build this thing a little bit more, and he made a commitment to conduct the Index of Consumer Sentiment, what's known as consumer confidence here in New York. So that's a project that's mirrored after what the University of Michigan has been doing, going all the way back to 1950, and we've continued that study here in New York. It began in 1999. We continue it to this day. It's both a leading and lagging economic indicator and something that is relied on by all sorts of business people, economists, et cetera. So that's something they started. And then I guess the next great step was Doug and Tom decided they would stick their toe into politics a little bit and started to do a few political surveys. It wasn't really their area of strong expertise, but they caught the eye of a political operative, a fellow named Steve Greenberg, who actually approached them and said, you know what, your survey needs some help, and I'm volunteering. So Steve came to join the team in 2005. The Siena, New York poll was born. That's now a poll that we do every single month. Steve has remained with us as a spokesperson and consultant on that poll ever since. And that really, that political poll has been kind of a springboard that has led us to some of the political work that we do through today. So it came to that point in 2007 where they said, we really need someone who is trained in survey research, who understands the movement and methodologies that we see today in polling. And I was fortunate enough to be the fellow that they said, welcome to Siena, and take it to the next level.
And we've got about 6 minutes left in the first half of today's show. And as that last answer shows, there's been incredible growth through the years since the 80s, and that comes with growing the team as well. And Siena has an amazing team across all campus partners, and it's no different with the Research Institute. Can you briefly highlight some of the team members that you have at SCRI and some of the roles and responsibilities that those members have?
Sure. We've been really fortunate to build a fantastic team, and quite a few of them have been with me as my partners, my colleagues, for about 15 years. Megan Crawford is our Director of Data Management. She was trained at a competitor in survey research and has been instrumental in bringing us current with all the methodological approaches that we take. Colleen Cromery has been with us. She started actually initially as a caller. She had experience. She'd worked in a call center in India, and she came to us as a caller, moved on to be the person running our call center, got her degree here at Siena over that time period, and now is our Director of Project Management. So she handles many of the projects that we do in areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, civic engagement, and is a really crucial member of the team. Leslie Foster has been with us about a decade. She's our business development manager. She builds tremendous partnerships and alliances across the community and is spreading the news of what we do and what we can do for partners. So, for example, she built a partnership with the folks over at the Times Union, the Hearst Foundation, that led to us doing an ongoing study of the opioid crisis that we've been doing now for about 6 years. Travis Broadbeck was a Siena student. He interned with us and now is our Assistant Director of Data Management. I sometimes refer to myself as the past and Travis as the future. He's certainly well-versed in some of the methodological approaches that are being born today, the integration of AI, for example. And I think Travis has a long future potentially with SCRI, and really has been a tremendous addition to the team. And then we have a number of other members of the team. Andrea Ciafarino runs our business operations and also handles our website. Brian Jetty takes care of call center management at this time, is fantastic at recruiting and training students and members of the community who work for us as callers. We have hundreds of people at this point who are trained to work for us because we not only make phone calls out of our call center here on the campus in the basement, the scenic basement, the plush basement of Heinz Hall, but we built the infrastructure so that people could work remotely, and we have callers now that work for us in Virginia, in Florida, in South Carolina, and in Texas, among other places. And then Tess Zukowski is with us. She works as our pre-election coordinator. Each time as we're leading up to one of these busy seasons, we bring in an additional person who handles all the daily scheduling and quotas that we have to manage. So we have a very active professional team, and that doesn't even start to include our callers, some of whom have been with us as much as 20 years, our line supervisors. We've got several supervisors, Barb Geek, for example, who has been with us now for 20 years, involved in our call center management. So for some reason, people really, they join our family at Siena College and at the Siena College Research Institute, and quite a few have stayed with us for quite a while.
And it's really remarkable, and I'm glad that you mentioned Travis Broadbeck, because it leads us into what I'm going to have as our final question for the first segment of today's show, and move the Siena College and New York Times discussion to open up the next segment, and that is the student opportunities here on campus. We're fortunate enough to have incredible students and incredible on-campus opportunities. When you look at the student level of involvement within SCRI, what are some of those notes that you can share with our listeners today on how students can have opportunities to partake in what you guys do as a team?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think we're the largest employer of students on campus. In the course of a given year, we'll employ as many as 300 students. Some stay with us the whole year. Some stay with us for 4 years. Some work one shift and say, this is not for me. But we, over time, every single student who is looking for a job at the Siena College Research Institute, we bring them in, we train them, we teach them how to engage in social scientific research, and we put them on the phones. Now, many of them stay with us and continue to really enjoy what we do. Some have worked for us as interns each semester. We have a developmental internship program where students get to work a little bit behind the scenes. They learn a little bit about the data analytics, the preparation of results for press releases, the interaction with clients. And so somebody like Travis went through that internship program and really has a profoundly interesting story to tell when they graduate from Siena about being an important, integral part of the Siena College Research Institute. And I'm sure when they head out to more education or the workforce, that's a story that they can tell that employers find really interesting. We even have, one recent intern who was on the water polo team who now has gotten a very good job based on her experience as an intern working in SCRI at one of the entities that we do ongoing work for, the NISO, the folks who run the electrical grid here in New York State.
Well, Dan, you've gave me about 5 different names to now have 5 new episodes of the Saints and Alumni Show, so I appreciate that in the first segment. When we come back in the second segment of today's show, we're going to talk about how the partnership began with the New York Times, the method used when we poll here with the college, and talk a little bit behind the numbers for the upcoming election. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint. Welcome back to the Saints and Alumni Show right here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint. I'm your host this week, Brandon Murphy, class of 2017, from the Office of Alumni Engagement, and this week I'm joined by Don Levy, director of the Siena College Research Institute. And for the second half of today's show, I really want to have a great discussion on the partnership with the New York Times poll and the polling that we do around the election. But that is one of many partnerships that the SCRI team has. And before we get into that, Don, can you give us some insights into additional partnerships that you guys have, not just throughout the capital region, but throughout the country that you guys work with on a week-to-week basis?
Sure. I always describe SCRI as sort of resting on 4 pillars, one being the politics, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, but also the economy, social and cultural work, and then fee-for-service work. And some of the things that I'd highlight that really have been a wonderful thing that we've been able to accomplish over the years. We started, when I first got here in 2007, an upstate business leader survey that we initially worked with First Niagara Bank. Now our partner on that is the Business Council of New York State, and we interview CEOs all across New York about their level of economic confidence, their challenges, their predictions for the future. And now that survey has grown to such an extent that we're partnering with the National Association of State Chambers of Commerce, and for 2 years we've done that survey nationally. Additionally, my training is as a sociologist, so I'm interested in the social determinants of health, community well-being. We've built a unique method of measuring how healthy is a community, whether that community is the capital region, New York State, or the United States. And we've partnered with people like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Data Haven, a large organization in the state of Connecticut, to study, how healthy a community you are. And it's ended up being a study that is repeated year after year and allows local communities or states to set targets to better the lives of people in that area. Another one that gets a lot of attention is our study of sport fanship that we've done for the last couple of years in partnership with the Jandoli School at our sister school, St. Bonaventure. That recently the work that we did there was featured on 60 Minutes insofar as we were exploring online sports gambling. And just the other day, we had an opportunity to present that work in a press conference that Congressman Paul Tonko held here at Siena College. Other organizations that we've worked with, that we continue to work with, include publications like Newsday, C-SPAN, health departments like the New York Department of Health. So, when I first got here to Siena, there was one project on the docket, and the folks on my team say, Don never rests. He makes it so that we have multiple projects going on simultaneously. So that's a quick walk through some of the partnerships that we have right now.
And I know we could do a segment on each one of those partnerships, and it's a great overview of how busy the team is on a day-to-day basis. And right now, as I said in the opening, incredibly busy with the election coming up, and that helps us move the conversation over to the partnership that we have with the New York Times. Can you talk a little bit, Don, how that partnership came about and why Siena was a great fit for that partnership?
Well, funny story. We started out back in 2007 through 2011-12, cutting our teeth on local elections. We were doing New York State Senate races, New York congressional races, and at that point in time, the New York Times wouldn't publish our work because we were sampling off the list of registered voters rather than the technique that was considered the gold standard at that time, that being random digit dialing, where people, where pollster would simply call numbers and say, are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote in the 42nd State Senate District? So it took a while for me to demonstrate that actually our method of identifying voters off the list of registered voters was not only good enough to be published in the Times, but good enough that the Times ended up coming to us in 2012 and saying, not only will we publish you, but we'd like you to do polling for us. So we went from, having to demonstrate that the method that we were using was good enough to that being the method that they realized was the most accurate. In fact, it's led now over the last several cycles to us being, for our work, the New York Times Siena poll, being named the most accurate pollster in America by 538.com 2 cycles in a row.
And when you talk about the most accurate poll in America, I want to dive a little bit deeper into that conversation as well and get your perspective, big picture, good polling and bad polling being a trusted source of information. Don, can you share us some insights into when a consumer is looking at 25 different polls, kind of what should stand out to them when they're reading into that data to be a trusted poll and good versus bad?
Well, it's certainly a difficult task to ask consumers to be able to understand that. I think that you're looking for a poll that is fully transparent, that tells you exactly what they did and how they did it, and also publishes not only the overall results, but each question and the order in which the questions were asked. I mean, that would be the simplest standard of a legitimate, transparent poll, so that you as a consumer can be reassured that there were no questions that were biased or manipulative. and that any type of sponsorship of the poll is also made known. So certainly, if the poll is paid for by a candidate or a party, they have a slightly different objective in polling than we do, or other reputable pollsters who we have no bias. We don't favor one party or one candidate over the other. So I that's the task of the consumer. I think that in reality, in today's world, if you're interested in pre-election polling, certainly come to our website and take a look at our polling. That would be number one. But visit the polling aggregation sites where they're taking all the polls and they're putting together so that you can look at the difference or similarities between 8, 10, 12 polls of Pennsylvania or nationally. And now not only 538.com, but Real Clear Politics, the New York Times, Washington Post, all have aggregation sites where each individual poll is now a single data point. Now, I will tell a little bit about methodology. Again, it might be a little bit down in the weeds, but not all polls use the same methods. We are a telephone shop, so 100% of our pre-election calls are made via telephone. We call off this list of registered voters. We call for you by name. We have already computed, based on your vote history, a probability that you're going to vote. We then ask you how likely you are to vote. We combine those two things into a score, if you will, and that score is applied to your answers as a weight. Now, that might have been a little bit too much in one sentence, but that's our methodology. Our belief is that anyone who is registered to vote has a greater than zero probability of actually turning out. So at this point in the election cycle, you'll hear the word likely voters kicked around. The other method of determining likely voters is what's called a cut model, where you get someone on the phone or online, and you ask them a series of questions, and you deem them either yes, you're likely, or no, you are not likely. So that's why they're cut. So there are voters who are deemed not to be likely who are cut out of the survey. We have found, and we've checked this over time, that there are plenty of folks who express a tepid likelihood to vote, who end up voting on Election Day. And there are some voters who they tell you they're almost certain they're going to vote and they don't show up. So we compute that probability and we apply that as a weight. We also, some people say, well, how do you know you're calling the right people? When we call a state and, to focus on Pennsylvania, seeing as the whole world is focused on Pennsylvania right now, we'll take the state of Pennsylvania, we'll divide it up into 6 regions. Within each region, then we have a quota. How many people should we have from the Philadelphia area, the Philadelphia suburbs, the Pittsburgh area, central Pennsylvania? Then within that region, we'll quota by race, by age, by education. So we target specific types of people to minimize the error that can occur if you simply stood in front of a supermarket with a clipboard and spoke to the first 50 people that you reach. The third thing that we do that's a little bit different than some other folks is we are rigorous in terms of calling people back. There are some folks who are easier to reach than others. We want to make sure that we get the opinion of the hardest to reach people. So we will make 3, 4, 5 attempts to call someone back. We have found, especially in this most recent election cycle, that folks who tend to be ardent supporters of former President Trump are a little bit less inclined to participate in public opinion polls than folks who supported President Biden or currently support Vice President Harris. So that callback system and this quota system allows us to have a much better opportunity to make sure that we have a sample that's representative and includes voters who support the former president.
And we've got just about under 5 minutes left in today's show, Don. And I want to kind of conclude now with diving into a little bit of the numbers and where the race stands on the presidential level. Now that our listeners understand the techniques, the data, the science behind the method, can you give us a little bit of insight into where is the focus of polling going on? Is it a specific amount of battle states? Is it all the battleground states? And is there any recent polling that you can update us on where the race currently stands about 2 weeks out?
Sure. Well, there's national polling and battleground state polling. National polling, people say, well, what do you do that for? We don't elect a president based on the national popular vote. But certainly we do that to get a broad picture of how different types of people feel about the two candidates. And secondly, the old rule of thumb was that a Democrat needed to win the national popular vote by about 4 or more points if indeed the Democrat was going to prevail in the battleground states. The poll that we released just this morning shows that the current race between former President Trump, Vice President Harris is tied, dead even, 48-48. Now, it's incredibly interesting because you start to look under the hood a little bit, and Trump leads dramatically with men. He leads dramatically with white voters, most especially white voters without a college education. Trump leads in the South. Trump leads in the Midwest. Harris leads dramatically with women, with young people, in the Northeast, with voters of color, most especially with black voters. So all that is out in our poll. And really, many of those subgroups that I was just mentioning, we're down to the point where whichever one or ones of those subgroups turn out at greater or less than anticipated levels is what's going to swing the contest in the 7 battleground states. So the 7 battleground states, and I'm sure if people are listening to this podcast, they probably know them and can, spin them off very quickly. Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then the 3 Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So that's where we're going to turn our attention to. Our polling is starting today, right on through Saturday, November 2nd, in those 7 states to try to get as accurate a read as we possibly can. We'll be doing pretty significantly sized samples in all those states, and we'll be looking to see whether we see any movement whatsoever. At this point in the race, either Trump or Harris could win all 7 of those states or any combination thereof. Neither of the 2 leading candidates is ahead in any one of those battleground states by a percentage that is outside the margin of error. In fact, at this point, Trump is up by about 2.5 points in Georgia in the polling average. That is the largest lead that either candidate has in any of the 7 states. So really, we've identified how close the race is. It really comes down to these various subgroups. If you looked at subgroups within these states, there are leads of 30, 40 points within subgroups. So which of these subgroups turn out? That's why the candidates are working so hard to generate enthusiasm amongst their supporters and to try to appeal to the very few handful of undecideds. Now, let me say a couple words about undecideds. Some people turn to me and they say, Don, how can anybody be undecided? Well, our polling shows that at least 4% of voters still tell us they're undecided, but about an additional 6 or 7% say they still possibly could change their mind. So how can that be? Well, there are many voters who are not as engaged as others, who don't eat and sleep politics, certainly the way I do, and they're conflicted. They may, on the one hand, as a majority of voters do feel, that Trump is better on economic issues. They're concerned about the cost of living. They're concerned about inflation. And a majority of voters feel as though Trump and the Republicans are better on the economy. However, at the same time, they're concerned about reproductive rights. They're concerned about the state of our democracy. And both of those issues are seen as areas where the Democrats and Vice President Harris can be trusted more than former President Trump. So you have voters who are not meaningfully engaged. In many cases, they are younger voters who are torn. They say on the one hand, on the other hand, in fact, we have had voters tell us when we've had them on the phone with our surveys, and they say, you know what, I'll probably make up my mind when I have that ballot in front of me. Interestingly, this election that nearly 80% of voters tell us is the most important election of their lifetime may very well be decided in 7 states by people who are going to make up their mind when they have that ballot in front of them.
Well, Don, that is a fantastic way to conclude the show today. We appreciate all the work that your institute does, the team members that you have, and the data that you provide, really the country. And we just thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with our listeners. Everybody, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time right here on 88.3 The Saint.